Brothers and sisters, welcome back to the Behavior Revolution and our final Ezekiel video. We're going to do a summary today because we've seen enough. I got what I wanted to see out of Ezekiel. And if you want to dive into it verse by verse, chapter by chapter for the next 40 chapters, be my guest. But I'm just going to summarize it all here. And let's dive into it. It's very interesting because it's all about the new temple and how everybody thinks there's going to be, because it's given in Ezekiel, this blueprint for a new temple, and it goes into such description, about 9 chapters devoted to and it's like reading the instructions for the tabernacle of Moses, temple of Solomon. It's like that. So naturally people think, well, those ones were built, so this one's going to be built too. Not understanding the spiritual vein of what's going on, not understanding the context, the historic timeline, the fact that Yahuwah is no longer around. He transformed into Yahusha. So how could it be? Let's wrap it all up in a nice bow. The new temple conclusion. As we know, Ezekiel was a priest who had been living in Jerusalem during the first Babylonian attack on the city. Nebuchadnezzar spared the city, but took a first and then later a second wave of Israelite prisoners and dragged them off into exile. And Ezekiel was among the second deportation. So the book of Ezekiel begins 5 years after all that. Ezekiel was sitting on the bank of an irrigation canal near his Israelite refugee camp, and he's 30 years old, the year that he would have been installed as a priest in Jerusalem. And then all of a sudden Ezekiel has this vision. He sees a storm cloud approaching, and then inside the cloud are 4 strange creatures that have wings outstretched and touching each other. And these creatures had 4 faces. And then he saw 4 whirling wheels. Remember the galgal, the wheels, the whirling wheels, whirlwind wheels, one by each creature. It's like a chariot. And then he saw that the wings of the creatures were supporting this dazzling platform like sapphire crystal. And on that platform is a throne. And then sitting on that throne is this human-like creature, glowing and shrouded in fire and lightning. And then all of a sudden Ezekiel realizes what he's seeing. Ezekiel calls it the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Yahuwah. It's imagery. Basically, it's Alahim riding his royal throne chariot. Now, the common word used is glory, but in Hebrew it's kabod, which means heavy or significant or esteem. Remember that? That's what's supposed to be shining through our temple. Heavy, significant, esteem. You know when he's there. You can feel him. And Scripture uses this word to describe the physical appearance and manifestation of Alahim's significance when he shows up in person. In other words, Yahusha is inside us. He baptizes us in spirit. You know when he's flowing through you, and he's loving, enjoying and peacing and patiencing and kinding, all these things through us. You can feel him, feel the weightiness, the heaviness, the significance, like Adam and Eve could feel him in the garden. And when he was gone, because of their sin, they felt naked. The air was different. Everything was different. Now these images in this vision, they're very similar to what happened when Alahim appeared on Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus, and also very similar to the images of Yahuwah's presence over the Ark of the Covenant. Remember all the cherubim stuff? And that's actually the most shocking thing about Ezekiel's vision. What is Yahuwah's glory esteem doing in Babylon? Because that's where Ezekiel is. What's he doing over there? It's only in a vision, but what's he doing over there? It's supposed to be above the Ark of the Covenant in the temple in Jerusalem, which practically, physically at this point, it still is. But it's about to destroy everything. Ezekiel accuses and warns Israel of destruction, and so the first section of the book opens to explore that question as Ezekiel begins to accuse Israel of rebellion. So Yahuwah first speaks to Ezekiel from the throne chariot, and he commissions him as a prophet. Ezekiel is to accuse Israel of breaking their covenant agreement with Alahim in many ways. Israel has given their allegiance to other gods and goddesses and has been worshipping idols, and this has all led to rampant social injustice and violence. And so as a result, Yahuwah appoints Ezekiel to warn the people. The first 2 Babylonian attacks that took Ezra into exile are going to be matched by another. And Jerusalem, its temple and people all face imminent destruction. So Ezekiel uses words and bizarre behaviour to get his message across. He also performs many of Yahuwah's warnings in what could only be described as street theatre. Ezekiel would go out in public and start behaving in these really bizarre ways that were like parables of his prophetic message. So he was supposed to build a tiny model of Jerusalem and then stage an attack on it. Or he was to shave off all his hair and then chop it up with a sword. Or the most extreme was when he was to play the role of a scapegoat on the Day of Atonement, and he would lay on his side for over a year, eating food cooked over dung as a sign of the nasty food that people would have to eat during the siege of Jerusalem. And perhaps the most disheartening thing of all is the bad news Alahim gave Ezekiel, that no one was going to listen to him. You've been commissioned, you're going to go and do all this, but don't worry, no one's going to believe you or listen to you anyway. Yes, Israel would reject him because of their rebellious and hard heart. And that's pretty much the state of the bride and certainly the world that we find ourselves in today. We're called to never get tired of doing good, but don't worry, no one's going to be interested anyway. And this recalls us to Moses' description of the people after the wilderness rebellion, when he predicted that exile would one day happen. And Ezekiel had the unfortunate privilege of seeing it all happen. And so a disheartened Ezekiel begins to perform his task. And after about a year, he has another vision, this one about the temple. He goes on this virtual tour of the temple and he sees what's happening there in his absence. And it is not good. In the outer courtyard in front of the temple, he sees this large idol statue. And then he sees the elders of Israel worshipping other deities, all carved around the inside walls of the temple. And then he sees the women of Israel. They're worshipping a Babylonian god named Tammuz. And the vision ends with Yahuwah's glorious throne chariot moving up, up, up and away from the temple. It's leaving, going east, headed towards Babylon. And it's heading back to the 𝗕𝗪𝗡, back to heaven. And so then we come to see why and how Yahuwah's glory appeared to Ezekiel there in Babylon. Because that's where the remnant is. That he's still speaking. He's always whispering to his remnant. He's whispering to Daniel and he's whispering to Ezekiel. Israel's whorish idolatry and their covenant violations. That's why he's over in Babylon, and that's why he's destroyed Jerusalem. That's why he's over in Babylon for a time. Because of Israel's whorish idolatry and their covenant violations. He's divorced her and exiled her from his promises. It's become so blatant and offensive that Alahim has left his temple. They've driven him away and he consigns it to destruction. And even though they are divorced, Yahuwah promises that he will raise up a new covenant with a small remnant and transform all the promises to them by removing their heart of stone, giving them a new soft heart of flesh and a new spirit within them, so they can love and truly follow him. But in order to do this, he will leave his throne and come to earth as a man to fulfill all the laws, covenants, and messianic prophecies, and transition all the covenant Hebrew promises of the flesh into spiritual blessings of his eternal kingdom. So there's a small glimmer of hope here, which is quickly submerged under the reality of the imminent destruction. Because once Jerusalem is destroyed, then none of the exiles have anything to hope for. They're all still praying towards Jerusalem and hoping for Jerusalem and thinking that their Alahim, despite their disobedience, is in Jerusalem and in the temple. It's gone. So, quickly submerged under the reality of imminent destruction. But chapter 11, which we did a couple of videos ago, chapter 11 is a key vision, for it helps us understand how the rest of the book has been designed. So the next 3 sections are all announcements of Yahuwah's judgment. First on Israel, then the nations around Israel, and then on Jerusalem itself. But then after that, the hopeful conclusion of chapter 11 gets developed in the final 3 sections of the book. First, hope for Israel, then for the nations, and then for all creation. Ezekiel depicts Israel's rebellion. Ezekiel depicts Israel's rebellion and idolatry. Chapter 12 to 24 focuses on Alahim's judgment coming to Israel, and this is a diverse collection of poems and visions. And here Ezekiel shows his fondness for abstract parables. So he depicts Israel as a burnt, useless stick, or as a rebellious wife, or as a dangerous raging lion that gets captured, or as 2 promiscuous sisters. These are all depictions of Israel's senseless rebellion and idolatry that results in their ruin. And we saw a lot of that when we dissected the text. In this section, Ezekiel also acts like a lawyer and begins arguing the case that first of all, Jerusalem's destruction is truly deserved after centuries of covenant violation, 1,000-odd years of covenant violation and abominable behaviour, and that even if the most righteous people in the world like Noah, Daniel or Job were alive and praying for Yahuah to spare Israel, Yahuah would not accept their prayers, for it's far too late. And so Alahim's goodness actually demands that he brings justice on this generation of Israel. The exile has become inevitable. They've reached the point of no return. And following this, Ezekiel focuses first on the nations immediately around Israel. He focuses on the nations immediately around Israel, and then on two most powerful states in the region, Egypt and then Tyre. Israel has allied with these nations and adopted their gods and goddesses and their idols. And so Yahuah accuses the kings of Tyre and Egypt for arrogantly viewing themselves as gods who get to define right and wrong on their own terms, just like everyone today, defining right and wrong on their own terms. And Yahuah holds these kings accountable for their pride, and he announces that he will use Babylon to bring them down too. They will face Yahuah's justice along with everybody else. Following these really intense sections is a short story in chapter 33. Ezekiel's met by a refugee who's just arrived from Jerusalem and gives him the report that Babylon has attacked the city of Jerusalem and that the city has fallen and the temple is completely destroyed. Ezekiel's grim warnings have become a reality. The exile was the most horrendous catastrophe that ever happened to Israel, proving that Yahuah was done with Israel for good. But remember, at the end of chapter 11, Yahuah promised that there was still a future promise beyond Israel's divorce. And so the rest of the book is designed to explore Ezekiel's vision of hope. First for Israel, then for the nations, and then for all creation. The hope for Israel's promises begins with Yahuah promising to raise up a new David, a future messianic king who's going to be the kind of leader that Israel needed but never got. And this new kingdom of people who are going to come under the messianic king's rule is going to be a spiritually transformed people. Alahim's going to deal with the corrupt heart of their problem of rebellion by giving them new hearts and an incorruptible seed. It's just like Moses promised at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. Alahim says he's going to remove their hard hearts and send his spirit into his people, baptizing them in spirit in order to give them new soft hearts that can love and obey their Alahim. And this idea gets developed in the next strange vision. Ezekiel sees a huge valley filled up with dry human bones and skeletons. And Yahuah tells him that it's an image, a metaphor for Israel's spiritual state and their rebellion against Yahuah that resulted in exile and the literal death of many people. But it was also an abstract image of the death and divorce of their covenant relationship. And Alahim tells Ezekiel that his spirit is coming to bring his people back to life. And so this wind comes and it causes all of the bones to stand up, and it fills them with breath and life. And then skin grows over the bones. And then all of a sudden, Ezekiel sees all of these new humans standing in front of him. Remember, the structure of the tabernacle was a mobile, bone-like structure, a framework, which then gets skin put over it. Well, this is the formation of the new living temples, the new living tabernacles, dwelling places. All of a sudden, Ezekiel sees all of these new humans standing in front of him. Now this vision, it's recalling the story about the creation of humans in Genesis, where Alahim made humans out of dirt and divine breath. And now Israel and all humanity have rebelled against Yahuah, resulting in death. And so the only hope is that Alahim would perform a new order of creation and remake humans in such a way that they can live in a relationship of love with their Alahim and each other. He's got to do something new, a new creation order, a new covenant order, so they can love without the corruption being in them. But after Alahim deals with the evil that's in the hearts of his own people, some questions still remain unresolved for Ezekiel. Like, what about the evil that's still rampant out there in the nations? And what about the future of Yahuah dwelling in a literal temple? And that's what the final two sections of Ezekiel are about. So first comes chapters 38 and 39, and they promised Alahim's final defeat of evil among the nations, which gets personified by a ruler who's named Gog, from the land of Magog, Yogog and Magog, Gog. Now this name is derived from a genealogy of ancient kingdoms and lands from Genesis 10, and it referred to powerful nations from the distant past. And so Ezekiel picks up this ancient scriptural name as an image, it's imagery of any and all violent kingdoms. Gog and Magog today could be whatever the global power of evil that's going on in the world is, its imagery. So we find that Gog gets allied with 7 nations that come from all 4 directions of the compass. It's clearly an image that represents all of the nations. This also helps us understand why Ezekiel describes Gog with images that he used earlier in the book to describe the king of Tyre and the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh. You see, for Ezekiel, Gog is a combination of all the worst, most violent people in the scripture. Gog is the image of human rebellion against Alahim. The basic story in these chapters is that Gog resists Alahim's plan to restore his people. And so just like Pharaoh in the Exodus story, Gog comes to destroy the people. But Alahim unleashes his justice on Gog, and it's in a flurry. It's in a flurry of scenes that don't actually make much sense if you read them in literal sequence. Because first Gog and his armies are consumed by an earthquake, but then they're consumed by fire 2 different times. And then after that, Alahim comes and strikes Gog and his army down in the fields where they lay unburied for months. It's clear that these scenes are full of abstract imagery. Ezekiel has pulled out his entire poetic tool set here to describe how Alahim is determined to finally defeat human evil that has ruined his world. And this is so that he can pave the way for a new creation. He's defeating the evil within a human being so that he can create a new creation in a human being. And so once evil is finally dealt with amongst the nations, the last section of the book of Ezekiel describes how Alahim's presence is going to one day return to his people. How is Alahim's presence going to one day return to his people? And his temple to bring complete restoration. So Ezekiel first gets this long, elaborate vision of a new temple and a new city. He's given this heavenly tour guide who shows them around the new temple complex, and it's much larger and more majestic than even Solomon's temple. There's a new altar, new priests, a whole new system of worship. Does this sound familiar? And then after this elaborate tour, Alahim's glorious throne chariot that he saw back in his first vision comes back and it enters the new temple order. That's even enough there for me to see what the new temple's going to be. It's me. It's you. And he wants to lower his chariot, temple, throne, chariot glory into me and into you, and work our mobile temples around to be shining lights, manifesting his love to people. So the meaning, however, when you see 9 chapters of blueprints, the crones and the preachers and teachers are naturally going to say it's natural, aren't they? The meaning of these temple visions has been a source of debate for so long, as many religious leaders believe that this vision will be fulfilled literally one day, and that these chapters offer the actual blueprints for the new temple that will be built literally during a millennial reign after Yahusha returns. But the truth is that this vision, like all of Ezekiel's other visions, is full of abstract symbolism. They depict the reality of Yahusha's presence returning to his people, firstly in new living temples that house his presence, not in the form of an actual building. And just like the temple of old, an individual must be prepared through Yahusha's spirit and fire cleansing in order to be clean vessels for his service and manifestation. Otherwise, there's strange fire going on in us. There's perversion. There's idolatry. There's incense that doesn't belong. There's, weird food and weird bread and weird candlesticks. There's weird stuff going on in our temples. Idolatrous stuff. There's pictures of zodiacs all around our walls and tattoos and, bad behavior and bad language and hideous reputations and all this stuff in our temple. It has to be cleaned out because there's a corrupt spirit in our flesh. And he said he's going to judge and purge out the wickedness first, so that we can be useful, clean vessels for his service and manifestation. You'll also notice that Ezekiel never calls this new city Jerusalem. And chapters 47 and 48 show why. Ezekiel sees this tiny stream pouring out of the temple threshold and steps, and then it quickly becomes this raging river, and then it flows out of the temple and the city into the desert, into one of the most desolate places on planet Earth, the Dead Sea Valley. And then that river, it leaves behind a trail of trees and life, and then the Dead Sea gets transformed into a living sea that's teeming with plants and animals. And all of this imagery comes from the Garden of Eden in Genesis. It's the same abstract language. And we see just how cosmic Ezekiel's vision really is. Yahusha's plan has always been to transform a remnant of humanity, a small remnant of humanity, and his creation, transform them back into his life-giving presence. And so the book ends with the name of this garden city, this new city called Yahuah is there, in Yahuah Shammah, which means that's where he is. That's what Shamayim means. That's where he is, And we know from the history, and Yahuah leaving his throne and becoming Yahusha, and then returning to the throne as the spotless lamb, taking the scroll from the imagery and sitting on the throne in all authority, that this city is obviously Yahusha. Yahusha Shammah. It's where he is. In there. Where is he? In there. So, that's what's going to happen. We know that 500 years after Yahuah divorced Israel, he left his throne, became a man and delivered his people, those who would follow him, a new bride made up of both Jew and Gentile, to receive all old covenant promises and blessings given to the patriarchs. He transformed all the old into the new. Yahusha introduced his followers to his new covenant order and 2 royal laws of love, proving to them that he is in fact Alahim. All his disciples, apostles, followers, they knew it. And so Ezekiel's vision of doom and gloom comes to a full close of hope. Ezekiel's vision of doom and gloom comes to a close full of hope for a new future. And today his visions for a new temple, a new spiritual reign, are being completely fulfilled through a transformative vein, a narrow gate of deliverance. Because Yahusha said, I am the gate, I am the narrow gate. Enter at the narrow gate. I'm knocking on the door of your heart. Let me in. It's a narrow gate. Very few will find it. So, today his visions for a new temple and new spiritual reign are being completely fulfilled through a transformative vein, a narrow gate of deliverance whereby Yahusha prepares and allows us to know who he really is as our pure, perfect, and divinely powerful, majestic Alahim, seated on the throne of heaven in all esteem and glory. To be clear, we can only know Yahusha after we have gone through his process of spirit baptism and fire baptism, just like all temples. Only then are we the new living temples that Ezekiel saw and spoke of, far greater and more precious than any other blueprint or man-made structure. So, that's the conclusion to Ezekiel, guys. Do you know Yahusha Alahim yet? Do you know him yet? Have you even heard of the vein? Have you heard of the narrow gate? Have you heard of the steps? Yahusha is Alahim. There's a baptism of spirit to have. It's not about water. John the Baptist said, I baptize you in water. I'm just baptizing you for repentance, to prepare you. There's one coming who will do the real thing. I'm not even worthy to be any part of this, or even untie his sandals. He will baptize you in spirit, and he will baptize you in fire. There's a spirit baptism to receive, and there's a fire baptism to receive. And you come against the fire constantly. That's the Hebrews 12 experience of flogging, goading, disciplining, chastising, rebuking, to bring forth in us the peaceable fruits of righteousness. So you will know him. You will know him. Have you even heard of this vein? Once you know him, you're manifesting his love, joy, peace, patience, the 2 royal laws, loving Alahim, loving your neighbor. You're manifesting this all the time. That was the only purpose for the living temples, to manifest Alahim wherever they are. Manifest Yahusha Alahim wherever they are, however he says to do it. There is no more need, teaching, preaching, laborious study needed. That is the path. That is the end of the story. Time is so very short. The clock is about to strike. The clock is about to strike midnight on this last 6th day of preparation. So we must get through the spirit and fire, quick, smart, in order to be wise and faithful servants, full of the oil of his spiritual presence, by behaving his 2 royal laws of eternal love and the 9 fruits of righteousness. Unsubscribe from all these wicked preachers, teachers, pastors, rabbis. Unplug from all of this nonsense that they're putting on you. Yokes of bondage, old covenant nonsense, carcass dead, shadow teachings, the old schoolmaster taking you back to Moses, taking you back to Abraham, to Noah, to Adam, taking you back. Yahushua wants to take you forward onto greener pastures. Time is very short. You have to collect your oil now. Collect your spiritual food. Collect the right behavior. You've got to be matured. You've got to be whisked off into the wilderness waiting for your Alahim to return. Yahusha's about to arrive. That is Ezekiel, guys. If you want to dive into it more yourself, I encourage you to, but I ain't. Love you very much. Bye-bye.